The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Atlanta International Airport as Dr. Elena Richards made her way to Gate B-22. At 72 years old, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place in the world. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple blue dress with a light cardigan despite the summer heat. The air conditioning in airports was always too cold for her liking. Dr. Richards had made this trip dozens of times before. As the head of her own foundation, she flew to San Francisco quarterly for board meetings. Today's meeting was especially important. They were finalizing grants for 10 new medical research projects. She handed her first-class boarding pass to the gate agent, who smiled and wished her a pleasant flight. Walking down the jet bridge, Dr. Richards mentally reviewed the proposals she would be discussing tomorrow. Her foundation had grown beyond anything she had imagined when she started it after retiring from surgery 15 years ago. The flight attendant at the airplane door greeted passengers with a practiced smile. "Welcome aboard," she said, barely glancing at Dr. Richards. Finding seat 3A, Dr. Richards stored her small carry-on in the overhead bin and settled into the wide leather seat. She placed her handbag beneath the seat in front of her and took out the medical journal she'd been reading. Other first-class passengers boarded around her, mostly younger business people in expensive suits, tapping on phones and laptops. Dr. Richards had just opened her journal when a different flight attendant approached. This one was younger, with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me," the flight attendant said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "I believe you may be in the wrong section." Dr. Richards looked up, momentarily confused. "No, this is 3A. This is my seat." "Could I see your boarding pass, please?" The flight attendant's tone suggested this was more than a routine check. Dr. Richards reached into her handbag and produced her boarding pass. "Here you are, seat 3A, first class." The flight attendant examined the boarding pass with obvious skepticism. "Just a moment," she said, walking away with Dr. Richards' boarding pass still in hand. A businessman across the aisle gave Dr. Richards an uncomfortable glance before returning to his phone. A couple in the row behind whispered to each other. 5 minutes passed. Dr. Richards sat perfectly still, her journal unopened in her lap. She had experienced moments like this before, moments when people looked at her and saw only her age and her skin color, not the accomplished surgeon who had saved hundreds of lives or the philanthropist who had funded scholarships for thousands of students. The flight attendant returned with a man in a dark uniform, airline security. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us, please." "May I ask why?" Dr. Richards' voice remained steady, though her heart was beginning to race. "And may I have my boarding pass back?" "There seems to be a problem with your ticket," the security officer said. "We need to sort this out at the gate." "There's no problem with my ticket," Dr. Richards replied. "I've shown it to your colleague. I'm in the correct seat." By now, everyone in first class was watching. A few passengers had taken out their phones. "Ma'am, we can discuss this off the aircraft. Please gather your belongings." Dr. Richards looked at the faces around her, some curious, some uncomfortable, none offering assistance. She had two choices: create a scene or maintain her dignity. She chose the latter. "Under protest," she said clearly, making sure everyone could hear, "I will leave. But I want it noted that I have a valid first-class ticket, and I believe there is another reason I'm being removed." As she stood, another passenger, a young woman with kind eyes, spoke up. "Wait, this isn't right." She was quickly hushed by her companion. The security officer took Dr. Richards' arm, but she gently pulled away. "I can walk on my own, thank you." With her head held high, Dr. Richards collected her carry-on and handbag. As she walked down the aisle toward the exit, phones recorded her every step. What the cameras captured was not a woman broken by humiliation, but one whose eyes burned with resolve. What the airline didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have guessed, was exactly who they had just escorted off their plane, and what power she held in her seemingly fragile hands. Dr. Richards stood in the busy terminal, still clutching her carry-on bag. Around her, travelers rushed to gates, dragging suitcases and checking phones. No one seemed to notice the elderly woman whose hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a quiet, simmering anger she refused to let boil over. A young gate agent approached her with wide, apologetic eyes. Dr. Richards, I am so sorry about this misunderstanding. The flight attendant thought. There was no misunderstanding, Dr. Richards interrupted gently. My ticket was in order. My seat assignment was clear. She paused, looking directly at the young man. We both know what happened in there. The gate agent lowered his voice. The airline offers its sincere apologies. We can get you on the next flight to San Francisco, which leaves in 3 hours. We'll upgrade you to first class, of course. Dr. Richards almost laughed at that. I was already in first class, young man. Of course. I meant, we'll provide complimentary meal vouchers and access to our premium lounge while you wait. Dr. Richards considered her options. Her foundation board would understand if she missed today's preliminary meeting. The main session wasn't until tomorrow morning. I'll take the next flight, she said finally. But please know that meal vouchers don't fix what just happened. As she turned to walk away, she noticed a small crowd had gathered. Several passengers from her original flight stood nearby, phones still in hand. One woman stepped forward, the same one who had spoken up on the plane. Dr. Richards? I recorded what happened. It wasn't right, and people should see it. She held up her phone. I've already posted it online. I hope that's okay. Before Dr. Richards could respond, her own phone buzzed in her purse. Then again, and again, she pulled it out to find dozens of notifications flooding in. The video was spreading faster than she could have imagined. By the time Dr. Richards settled into a quiet corner of the airport lounge, her phone was ringing nonstop. News outlets, talk shows, civil rights organizations, all wanting to hear her story. Her foundation's communication director had already called 3 times, asking how they should respond. Tell them I'll make a statement when I'm ready, she told him. For now, I need some peace. But peace was hard to find as the video continued to spread. By evening, when Dr. Richards finally boarded her new flight to San Francisco, the clip had been viewed over 2 million times. Hashtags demanding justice were trending. The airline's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Landing in San Francisco, Dr. Richards found a car waiting for her, not the usual taxi, but a sleek town car sent by a board member. Everyone's seen the video, the driver explained as he took her back. The hotel's got reporters camped out front, so we're taking you in through the service entrance. The hotel manager met her at the back door, apologizing profusely for the circus out front. We've increased security on your floor, Dr. Richards. No one will bother you tonight. Alone in her suite at last, Dr. Richards kicked off her shoes and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. On the TV, her own face looked back at her from the evening news. The ticker at the bottom read, Prominent philanthropist forcibly removed from flight. Airline faces backlash. She turned off the TV and walked to the window. The San Francisco skyline glittered beyond the glass. In one of those buildings, the airline's regional headquarters was likely in crisis mode, PR teams working overtime to contain the damage. Her phone rang again. This time, it was her grandson. Grandma, are you okay? We all saw what happened. I'm fine, sweetheart, she said, her voice softer now. Nothing I haven't seen before in my lifetime. But it's not right, he insisted. They can't just treat you like that and get away with it. Dr. Richards watched the city lights, thinking of all the board meetings she'd attended over the years, all the investment decisions she'd influenced. Tomorrow's meeting was supposed to be about medical research grants, but perhaps the agenda needed to change. They won't get away with it, she said quietly. But I won't be fighting this battle in the press or on social media. There are other ways to make powerful people listen. After saying goodnight to her grandson, Dr. Richards opened her laptop. She sent a brief email to her foundation's investment committee requesting financial data on one specific company. Then she drafted another email to the airline CEO declining their formal apology that had arrived while she was in flight. The last line of her email read simply, Actions have consequences. Some are immediate, like viral videos. Others take time to unfold, like investment decisions. I look forward to watching your company's journey toward true accountability. She closed her laptop and finally allowed herself to rest. Tomorrow would be a busy day. Few people knew the full story of Dr. Eleanor Richards. As news channels played the airport video on repeat, reporters scrambled to piece together her background. Who was this elegant elderly woman who had maintained such composure while being humiliated? In her hotel room, Dr. Richards sipped her morning tea and ignored the ringing phone. The foundation board meeting had been postponed until the afternoon, giving her a rare moment of quiet. She opened the leather-bound photo album she always traveled with, a habit from before digital photos existed. The first photo showed a small wooden house with a tin roof surrounded by cotton fields that stretched to the horizon. 6 children stood on the porch steps, with Eleanor, the second youngest. Their clothes were clean but patched in many places. Their father worked those fields from sunrise to sunset, first as a sharecropper, then eventually buying those 5 acres with savings hidden in a coffee can for 20 years. She turned the page to see herself at 17, holding an acceptance letter to college. She had studied by kerosene lamp after finishing household chores, borrowing textbooks from the white school because her own school's books were outdated hand-me-downs. Her scholarship covered tuition but nothing else. She'd worked nights cleaning office buildings to pay for room and board. The next pages showed her medical school graduation. She stood alone in her cap and gown. Both parents had passed by then, her father's body worn out from decades in those fields, her mother's from working as a hotel maid while raising 6 children. Elena was the only one who made it past high school. Her siblings had sent what little money they could to help with her books. "You're carrying all our dreams," her oldest brother had told her. Dr. Richards turned to photos from her early days as a surgeon. She was often the only woman in the operating room, almost always the only black person. A newspaper clipping from 1982 showed her pioneering work on a new brain surgery technique. The headline read, "Dr. Richards saves child with revolutionary procedure," but the article barely mentioned her name, focusing instead on the hospital and the white department head who hadn't even been present for the surgery. More pages revealed a life of quiet determination. Photos of her receiving awards, always with a gracious smile that hid years of slights and obstacles. Pictures of the clinic she had opened in her old neighborhood, providing care to families who couldn't afford it elsewhere. Images of the first class of medical students who received Richards Foundation scholarships, bright young faces from backgrounds similar to her own. The final pages showed her transformation into one of the country's most influential philanthropists. There she was with former presidents, with global health leaders, with finance executives. Few people made the connection between the soft-spoken doctor who focused on educational access and the sharp-minded investor whose foundation controlled billions in assets. Dr. Richards closed the album as her phone rang again. This time she answered. It was Vivian, her foundation's chief investment officer. "I got your email," Vivian said. "I've pulled the numbers on our airline holdings." And Dr. Richards moved to the window, looking out at the city now bathed in morning light. "We own just over 4% of their parent company through various funds. Current value is approximately $812 million. Dr. Richards nodded to herself. "More than I thought." "There's something else," Vivian continued. "They're launching a new expansion next quarter. They're counting on institutional investors like us for additional capital." "How interesting," Dr. Richards said quietly. "Let's discuss this further at the board meeting. I'd like to review our entire investment philosophy." After hanging up, Dr. Richards showered and dressed carefully in a deep purple suit that had been her signature look at important meetings for years. As she fastened her pearl earrings, a gift from her first major surgery patient 40 years ago, she thought about the long journey that had brought her here. She hadn't set out to become wealthy or powerful. She had simply wanted to heal people, to open doors for others like herself, to honor the sacrifices her family had made. The money had come later, through careful investments and an unexpected talent for seeing value where others didn't. She had built her foundation to ensure opportunities would exist for generations to come. Now, standing in front of the mirror, she saw not just an elderly woman who had been disrespected on an airplane, but the culmination of 100 years of her family's hopes and struggles. She saw her father's determination in her eyes, her mother's dignity in her posture. She saw the responsibility that came with the power she now held. Dr. Richards checked her watch. The car would be waiting downstairs to take her to the foundation meeting. Today, she would not be discussing medical research grants as planned. Today, she would be talking about accountability, about consequences, about using financial power to demand respect and change. She picked up her handbag and took one last look around the hotel room. On the television, a business news channel was reporting on the airline's stock opening slightly down after yesterday's viral video. The commentator wondered if the incident would have any lasting impact on the company. Dr. Richards smiled slightly as she turned off the TV. They have no idea what's coming, she whispered to herself. The Richards Foundation boardroom sat 20 stories above San Francisco, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the bay. 12 people gathered around the polished oak table, their faces serious as they waited for Dr. Richards to speak. She had called this emergency meeting, changing the agenda from medical research grants to investment strategy with little explanation. Dr. Richards entered precisely at 2 o'clock, as she always did. The room fell silent. She wore her purple suit and pearl earrings, her silver hair perfectly arranged. Only those who knew her well might notice the slight tightness around her eyes, the only sign of what she had experienced the day before. "Thank you all for accommodating this change," she said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "I know many of you have seen the video." Several board members nodded. A few looked uncomfortable. "I'm not here to discuss that incident from a personal perspective," Dr. Richards continued, her voice steady and calm. "What happened to me yesterday has happened to countless others who didn't have my resources or platform. What matters now is how we respond." Vivian, the Foundation's chief investment officer, distributed folders to everyone present. These contain our current holdings in Global Airlines and its parent company, Worldwide Aviation Group. Board members opened the folders, eyebrows raising as they saw the numbers. $812 million, Dr. Richards stated. "That's our current stake in the company that decided I didn't belong in the first-class seat I paid for." She paused, letting the amount sink in. "I'd like you all to turn to page 3. Pages rustled as the board members complied. This shows complaints filed against Global Airlines over the past 5 years, broken down by category. Note the highlighted section, 276 complaints specifically mentioning racial discrimination, 42 involving elderly passengers, 108 involving both. An older white man at the far end of the table, Tom Henderson, a longtime board member and retired judge, cleared his throat. "Eleanor, while what happened to you was inexcusable, I'm not sure we should make investment decisions based on one incident, even one as disturbing as this." Dr. Richards nodded. "A fair point, Tom. That's why I had Vivian compile this data. This wasn't one incident. This is a pattern. One that the airline's leadership has consistently downplayed or ignored." She turned to page 4 in her own folder. "And if you look at their executive team and board composition, you'll see little evidence they consider diversity a priority." A younger board member, Dr. Chen, a tech entrepreneur, spoke up. "What exactly are you proposing?" Dr. Richards folded her hands on the table. "Our foundation has always maintained that our investments should align with our values. We don't invest in tobacco companies while funding cancer research. We don't invest in predatory lenders while supporting financial literacy programs. And I believe we should not continue to invest in a company that has repeatedly demonstrated disrespect for the very communities we serve." The room was silent for a moment. Then Vivian spoke. "The recommendation is to divest our entire holding in Worldwide Aviation Group, including all subsidiary companies. The divestment would be executed over a 3-week period to minimize market impact, though some impact is inevitable given the size of our position." "Won't this hurt the foundation financially?" asked another board member. Dr. Richards nodded. "Potentially in the short term. But Vivian has identified several alternative investment opportunities in the transportation sector with better social responsibility records and comparable growth projections." She gestured to the back of the folder, where these alternatives were listed. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours. Some board members expressed concern about using the foundation's financial power in what could be seen as a punitive way. Others argued that this was precisely how institutional investors should enforce accountability. Dr. Richards mostly listened, allowing every viewpoint to be heard. As the debate wound down, Dr. Richards stood up and walked to the window. From this height, she could see tiny airplanes taking off and landing at the airport across the bay, small metal tubes carrying hundreds of people each, all trusting they would be treated with basic dignity. When I started this foundation, she said quietly, I wanted to create opportunities for people who face barriers. Some of those barriers are obvious: lack of education, lack of healthcare, lack of capital. But some are more insidious: being seen as less valuable, being treated as if you don't belong, being removed from spaces you have every right to occupy. She turned back to face the board. Our mission isn't just about writing checks. It's about changing systems that perpetuate inequality. Sometimes that means funding scholarships. Sometimes it means building health clinics. And sometimes it means using our financial position to send a clear message about what kind of behavior is acceptable in the marketplace. Dr. Richards returned to her seat. I'm calling for a vote on the divestment proposal as outlined by Vivian. All in favor? One by one, hands went up around the table. Even Tom, the skeptical judge, eventually raised his hand. The vote was unanimous. Thank you, Dr. Richards said softly. Vivian, please begin the divestment process tomorrow morning. As the meeting adjourned, several board members came to offer Dr. Richards personal words of support. She accepted them graciously but briefly. This wasn't about her feelings. This was about using power, the kind of power that corporations truly respected, to demand change. In the elevator going down, Dr. Chen caught up with her. You know, once word gets out about this divestment, other foundations might follow our lead. Dr. Richards nodded. I'm counting on it. Outside, her driver waited to take her back to the hotel. As they pulled away from the curb, she noticed a business news crew setting up near the building entrance. Word was already starting to spread. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Vivian, CEO of Global Airlines, requesting urgent meeting tomorrow. Dr. Richards smiled slightly as she texted back, decline. Tell him our decision is final, and remind him that actions have consequences. The morning sun had barely risen over Wall Street when the news broke. Financial reporters who normally covered dry corporate announcements suddenly found themselves with a story that crossed into social media territory. The headline on Bloomberg read, Richards Foundation pulls $800 million investment from Airline following viral incident. In the corner office of Worldwide Aviation Group's New York headquarters, phones began ringing off the hook. William Parker, the CEO, stared at his computer screen in disbelief as the company's stock ticker showed a 3% drop in pre-market trading. By the time the opening bell rang, the decline had deepened to 5%. Get me Dr. Richards on the phone, he barked at his assistant. Tell her it's urgent. But Dr. Richards wasn't taking his calls. She was already on a plane back to Atlanta, leaving the financial aftermath to unfold without her commentary. The statement released by her foundation was brief and devastating in its simplicity. The Richards Foundation has decided to divest all holdings in Worldwide Aviation Group and its subsidiaries. This decision reflects our commitment to investing only in companies whose practices align with our core values of dignity, respect, and equal treatment for all. No direct mention of the incident, no personal attack. Just $800 million walking out the door. By mid-morning, the story had evolved. Financial analysts who had dug deeper into the foundation's investment history noted that this wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. The Richards Foundation had a consistent record of divesting from companies with poor social responsibility records. This was simply their largest such action to date. What makes this particularly significant, explained a silver-haired analyst on CNBC, is the timing. Worldwide Aviation is planning a major expansion next quarter. They're counting on institutional investors like the Richards Foundation. This divestment raises questions about whether other investors might follow suit. In boardrooms across the country, that very question was being debated. The heads of 3 other foundations had already called emergency meetings. 2 pension funds were reviewing their own holdings. A major university endowment manager was preparing a statement. By noon, the stock had dropped 8%. Trading volume was 4 times normal. The company's public relations team issued a bland statement about regrettable misunderstandings and ongoing commitments to diversity, but the market wasn't buying it. Parker spent the afternoon in crisis meetings, his tie loosened, his face grim. How much exposure do we have? He demanded of his chief financial officer. How many other institutional investors might pull out? The CFO slid a document across the table. These 10 investors all have significant holdings. Together, they represent about 12% of our stock. All of them have explicit social responsibility criteria in their investment policies. Parker loosened his tie further. Get me everything we have on the Richards Foundation. Who's on their board? Who do we know who might influence them? His head of investor relations, a younger woman who'd been quiet until now, cleared her throat. Sir, with respect, I don't think that's the right approach. The Foundation's statement mentioned core values of dignity, respect, and equal treatment. Maybe we should be focusing on whether our company actually lives up to those values. The room fell silent. Parker stared at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. Get me the data on passenger complaints. All of it, not just the sanitized version we show the board. And I want our HR team in here with diversity numbers across all levels of the company. Outside the corporate bubble, the story continued to spread. The woman who had originally recorded Dr. Richards being removed from the plane was interviewed on the evening news. I never expected it would lead to this, she said. But honestly, good for her. She's using her power to stand up for people who don't have that kind of influence. Social media exploded with similar sentiments. Hashtags like #FlyWithRespect and #InvestingDignity trended worldwide. Other passengers came forward with their own stories of discriminatory treatment on various airlines. A congressman announced plans for hearings on discrimination in the transportation industry. By the time markets closed, Worldwide Aviation Group's stock had dropped 8.3%, erasing over $2 billion in market value in a single day. In her Atlanta home that evening, Dr. Richards sat in her favorite armchair, a cup of tea in hand, watching the financial news with mild interest. Her phone had been ringing all day, but she'd only taken calls from her foundation team and family members. Her grandson called just after dinner. "Grandma, you're all over the news. They're saying you single-handedly crashed their stock price. Aren't you okay with all this attention?" Dr. Richards smiled softly. "I'm fine, sweetheart. And I didn't crash anything. The market is simply responding to information about the company's practices. That's how it's supposed to work. But they're calling you a financial activist now." She chuckled at that. "I'm just a doctor who believes in accountability, nothing more." After they hung up, Dr. Richards turned the TV volume up slightly. A panel of business experts was debating the long-term implications for Worldwide Aviation Group. This goes beyond the immediate stock drop. A woman in a crisp suit was saying, "The Richards Foundation's statement mentioned values alignment. Other institutional investors with similar ethical investment policies will have to ask themselves if they can justify maintaining their positions." "Exactly," agreed another panelist. "This is about reputation risk now. Every investor, every customer is going to be looking at how this company responds. A generic apology isn't going to cut it." Dr. Richards nodded to herself. That was precisely the point. One person being removed from a plane was a news cycle story. $800 million walking away was a crisis that demanded real change. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. CEO tried calling 3 more times. Also, 2 other foundations have reached out about our divestment strategy. Dr. Richards typed back, "Tell the other foundations I'm happy to share our research. Tell the CEO I'll speak with him when I see concrete changes, not promises." Setting her phone down, she walked to her study and opened a folder Vivian had prepared before she left San Francisco. Inside was a detailed plan for reinvesting the divested funds in minority-owned transportation companies and airlines with strong diversity records. The financial projections looked promising. Doing the right thing didn't have to mean sacrificing returns. Dr. Richards made a few notes in the margins before closing the folder. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more questions, more pressure. But tonight, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The money that had been built on her lifetime of hard work and smart decisions was now speaking in a language that corporate America understood perfectly. She picked up a framed photo from her desk, her parents standing proudly in front of that small house with the tin roof. They had taught her that real change required both principles and power. Today, she had honored that lesson. Over the next 3 months, Worldwide Aviation Group underwent the kind of transformation that corporate consultants often recommend, but companies rarely implement. The stock price had stabilized after its initial drop, but remained down 6%. More significantly, 3 other major institutional investors had quietly reduced their holdings, citing alignment with investment values in their quarterly reports. In the company's Chicago headquarters, the boardroom had become a war room. The large oval table was now constantly covered with reports, market analyses, and stacks of passenger complaints that had previously been summarized and sanitized before reaching the executive level. "I had no idea," the head of customer service admitted during one particularly tense meeting. She pushed her glasses up and gestured at the complaint files. "These never made it to my desk in their original form. They were always categorized as misunderstandings or procedure adherence issues rather than discrimination complaints." William Parker, the CEO, rubbed his temples. In 6 weeks, he had aged 5 years. Who made the decision to recategorize these complaints? No one answered directly, but glances shifted toward the now empty chair that had belonged to the former chief operating officer. He had resigned to pursue other opportunities 2 weeks after the stock drop. Corporate speak for being pushed out. "It doesn't matter who did it," Parker finally said. "What matters is that it stops now, and that we fix what's broken." The fixes came rapidly after that. First, a top-to-bottom review of customer service protocols with particular focus on first-class seating disputes. The findings were uncomfortable. Flight attendants were twice as likely to question the legitimacy of black passengers in premium seating as white passengers. Next came mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff. Not the quick online course that had been the standard before, but intensive in-person workshops led by experts in the field. Flight attendants and gate agents shared their own experiences watching colleagues treat passengers differently based on appearance. "I saw it happening," admitted one veteran flight attendant during a training session. "I didn't speak up because I didn't want to cause trouble, but I knew it was wrong." The company's hiring practices underwent scrutiny as well. The diversity numbers told a clear story. While the ground staff and flight attendants showed reasonable diversity, the executive ranks remained overwhelmingly white and male. The board approved a new recruitment initiative specifically targeting experienced professionals from underrepresented groups. Most dramatically, Parker made the unprecedented move of appointing an independent review board with full access to customer complaint data and the authority to recommend disciplinary actions up to and including termination. The board included civil rights attorneys, former transportation regulators, and customer advocacy experts. "If we're serious about change, we need outside eyes watching us," Parker explained to nervous shareholders. "We need accountability that goes beyond internal checks and balances." The industry took notice. Competing airlines, seeing the financial consequences of worldwide missteps, began reviewing their own practices. 2 major carriers announced expanded diversity initiatives within weeks. Another hired its first-ever chief inclusion officer, poaching a respected executive from the tech industry. Travel blogs and industry publications ran features analyzing the Richards effect on airline policies. Aviation conferences that had previously focused exclusively on operational efficiencies and fuel costs now included panels on customer dignity and inclusive service. For Dr. Richards, watching from a distance, the developments were satisfying but incomplete. She declined all interview requests but kept a close eye on the changes through her network of contacts in the business world. When Vivian provided updates during their weekly calls, Dr. Richards would listen carefully, asking pointed questions about implementation timelines and accountability measures. "They're doing a lot of the right things," Vivian noted during one such call. "The question is whether it sticks when the spotlight moves on." Dr. Richards agreed. "That's always the question, isn't it? Real change needs to become part of the DNA, not just a crisis response." 6 months after the incident, Dr. Richards received a letter from William Parker. It wasn't the first communication she'd received from him. He had sent several attempted apologies in the early days, but this one was different. Instead of apologies, it contained specifics: diversity numbers before and after, complaint handling metrics, training completion statistics. It concluded with a simple request: "Would you be willing to meet with our newly formed Ethics Advisory Board to share your perspective?" Dr. Richards read the letter twice, noting what it said and what it didn't. No defensiveness, no excuses, no request for her to reinvest or endorse the company. just an invitation to contribute to the ongoing work. She picked up the phone and called Vivian. Let's do some research on their ethics advisory board. Who's on it? What actual power do they have? And most importantly, has anything really changed in the day-to-day experience of passengers? Vivian promised to have a full report by the end of the week. Are you considering accepting their invitation? Dr. Richards looked at the framed photo of her parents that sat on her desk. I'm considering it, but only if I'm convinced that what they're doing is real and lasting, not window dressing. After hanging up, she opened her laptop and began drafting what would become known in business schools as the Richards Standards, a framework for evaluating corporate commitment to inclusion that went far beyond diversity numbers to examine power structures, accountability mechanisms, and everyday practices. She didn't know it yet, but these standards would eventually be adopted by investment firms managing over $1 trillion in assets. The true measure of change, she wrote, is not what happens in the boardroom, but what happens at the gate. 1 year to the day after being escorted off the plane, Dr. Eleanor Richards stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Lakefront Hotel. Behind her, a banner read First Annual Worldwide Aviation Group Diversity and Inclusion Summit. The room was filled with hundreds of airline employees, from flight attendants to executives, all watching her with a mixture of awe and nervousness. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked out at the sea of faces. The silence in the room was complete. I didn't come here today to talk about what happened a year ago, she began, her voice steady and clear despite her 73 years. That was one moment in time. What matters more is what happens every day at gates, on planes, and in boardrooms across this industry. In the front row, William Parker, still CEO but noticeably humbler, nodded slightly. Beside him sat the new chief operating officer, a black woman with decades of aviation experience who had been hired away from a competing airline 6 months earlier. When I was a young doctor, Dr. Richards continued, I learned that diagnosis is only the beginning. Identifying a problem without implementing effective treatment doesn't help the patient. She paused, looking directly at the executives. Over this past year, your company has moved from diagnosis to treatment. The question now is whether the treatment will continue when the symptoms are less visible. She turned a page in her notes. The room remained completely silent. Change can come from many directions. Sometimes it comes through protests in the streets. Sometimes it comes through legislation and regulation. Sometimes it comes through lawsuits and court orders. Her voice grew softer, making everyone lean forward slightly to hear her. And sometimes it comes through the quiet decision to invest, or not invest, in companies that reflect our values. Dr. Richards had spent weeks preparing this speech, carefully balancing acknowledgement of progress with the reality that much work remained. She had reviewed passenger satisfaction data, examined the company's new hiring practices, and interviewed several employees. What she had found was encouraging but incomplete, the beginning of change, not its conclusion. The Richards standards, which many of you have seen, are not about perfection, she explained. They're about consistent effort and accountability. They ask whether a company has mechanisms to identify problems before they become crises. They ask whether people at all levels feel safe reporting concerns. They ask whether leadership reflects the diversity of customers and frontline staff. In the back of the room, a black flight attendant dabbed at her eyes. She had been among those who contacted Dr. Richards privately, sharing stories of small but meaningful improvements in how issues were handled. Your company has made progress in all these areas, Dr. Richards acknowledged. The independent review board has real authority. The new complaint tracking system prevents problematic patterns from being obscured. The mentorship program for junior employees from underrepresented groups is showing promising results. She turned to another page, but then set her notes aside entirely. But policies and programs aren't enough, she said, speaking now without her prepared text. Culture is built in small moments. It's built when a gate agent questions or doesn't question a passenger's right to be in first class. It's built when a colleague speaks up or stays silent after witnessing disrespect. It's built when leadership rewards or punishes those who raise uncomfortable truths. Dr. Richards stepped out from behind the podium, standing closer to the audience. I've been asked many times if my foundation will reinvest in your company. The answer is that we're watching closely, Not just the metrics and reports, but the everyday experiences of passengers who look like me. Because ultimately, what matters isn't what happens at summits like this. It's what happens tomorrow at Gate B22 when an elderly black woman boards your plane. She smiled slightly. The financial power that my foundation holds is significant, but it's not unique. What made our divestment effective wasn't just the dollar amount. It was that it reflected values shared by millions of people, potential customers, potential employees, and potential investors who are all watching to see whether your commitment to dignity is real and lasting. In the audience, phones remained down. No one was recording or texting or checking email. Every person in the room was fully present, understanding that they were witnessing something important. "I began my career healing individual patients," Dr. Richards said, her voice growing stronger. "In my later years, I've tried to help heal systems. Both require ongoing care, regular checkups, and honest assessment of progress." She returned to the podium and gathered her notes. "1 year ago, I was treated as if I didn't belong in a seat I had earned many times over. Today, I stand before you not seeking an apology or special treatment, but as a reminder that how we treat each person reflects who we truly are as organizations and as a society." Dr. Richards looked out at the room one last time. "My parents taught me that having a seat at the table isn't enough if you don't use that position to make room for others. The true measure of success isn't how high you climb, but how many you bring along with you. I hope that each of you, regardless of your position, will use whatever influence you have to ensure that everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve." As she stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in a standing ovation. Dr. Richards nodded in acknowledgement but did not smile. This wasn't about celebration, it was about commitment to the work that remained. Later that afternoon, as her driver took her to the airport for her flight home, Dr. Richards looked out at the city passing by. The world hadn't changed completely. There would still be people treated unfairly because of how they looked. There would still be companies that valued profit over people. But something had shifted. One moment of injustice, combined with the strategic use of power, had created ripples that continued to spread. Other foundations had adopted her standards. Other companies had reviewed their practices. And one elderly doctor who had been pulled off a plane had shown that dignity wasn't just a value to be proclaimed, but a standard to be enforced. At the airport, Dr. Richards walked confidently to the first-class check-in counter. The agent looked up, recognized her immediately, and smiled with genuine respect. "Good afternoon, Dr. Richards. We're honored to have you flying with us today."